Buenos días, mi nombre es José Abásolo, arquitecto y académico de la Escuela de Arquitectura de la Universidad de las Américas en Chile, y quiero darles la bienvenida a todas, a todos y todes quienes se conectan a esta hora al segundo Seminario Internacional de Arquitectura y Etnografía. Especialmente quiero agradecer a quienes han apoyado esta iniciativa desde la Universidad de las Américas en Santiago de Chile, especialmente al decano de la Facultad de Arquitectura, Diseño y Construcción, Juan Pablo Corbalán, al director de la Escuela de Arquitectura, Rodrigo Valenzuela Jerez, a la directora de Vinculación con el Medio, María Inés de Ferrari, al director del Núcleo de Lenguaje y Comunicación, Fernando Portal, espacio donde se aloja esta iniciativa, y también agradecer a Ricardo Green, sociólogo y antropólogo, junto a quien hemos dado forma a esta iniciativa. Desde el año 2020, la plataforma Arquitectura y Etnografía se ha constituido como un espacio de intersección y encuentro para quienes estudiamos el espacio y sus diversas formas de habitarlo, representarlo e imaginarlo. Entre diversas disciplinas tales como la arquitectura, la antropología, la geografía, el urbanismo y la sociología, nos sentamos junto al fuego para pensar y debatir sobre las nuevas formas de abordar los fenómenos espaciales asociados al territorio y la ciudad contemporánea. Desde aquí es donde nos preguntamos, ¿cuáles son las relaciones y cruces entre etnografía y arquitectura? ¿Cuáles son los alcances y desafíos de las nuevas tecnologías y métodos de investigación espacial? ¿Cuáles son sus puntos de encuentro, fricciones y avenencias? ¿Cuál es el rol de los sentidos en la epistemología de lo socioespacial y la distancia entre lo que es, lo que vemos y lo que representamos? Es en este terreno donde acampamos y donde los invitamos a unirse. Si en la primera versión del seminario del año 2020, marcado por un contexto global de pandemia y cuarentena, y desde un marco inscrito entre el giro etnográfico de la arquitectura planteado por Alvena Llaneva y los avances desarrollados por Momoyo Kajima en torno a la Architectural Ethnography, abordamos y discutimos con investigadoras e investigadores que utilizan el dibujo como herramienta que permite generar estos cruces disciplinares. Este año, en nuestro segundo encuentro, hemos ampliado la mirada hacia otros mecanismos y otras sensibilidades, y nos hemos abierto hacia ámbitos de investigación que indagan en el sonido, las nuevas formas de narración cinematográfica, el extractivismo y la cibernética territorial, la memoria y la identidad, las arquitecturas de los cuidados o también otras formas de aproximarnos a la arquitectura y la ciudad actual desde cartografías y diagramas. Quiero agradecer nuevamente a todas, a todos y a todes por estar aquí hoy conectados en el seminario, y quiero también aprovechar de introducir a quien me estará acompañando, moderando y realizando la entrevista, la arquitecta y académica Linda Schilling. Con esto, bueno, de ahora en adelante la sesión se realizará en inglés, y quiero dar la bienvenida a LOUISE LEMOINE. Welcome, LOUISE. Thank you so very much. It's a pleasure and honor to be with you here today.
Hello, Jose. It's my pleasure. Linda, we don't hear you.
There. BêKA and Louis join us today from Italy. Thank you for being with us today. And for those in the audience, ILA BêKA trained as an architect with a degree from the IUAV of Venice and, pardon my French, the École Nationale Supérieure de Paris-Belleville. Louis Lemoine graduated in art history from the Sorbonne in Paris. They are video artists, directors, and producers. BêKA and Lemoine have been working together for the past 15 years, focusing their research on experimenting new narrative and cinematographic forms in relation to contemporary architecture and urban environment. Their films have been widely presented in major international cultural events and museums, such as the Venice Architectural Biennale, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the Centre Pompidou in Paris, the V&A Museum in London, among many others. In 2016, the Museum of Modern Art in New York acquired the entire work of BêKA and Lemoine for its permanent collection. They are regularly invited to lecture at universities such as GSD at Harvard University, GSAP Columbia University, AAP at Cornell University, De Verlaje in the Netherlands, and have been teaching at GSAP for the New York-Paris program, the HEAD Geneva, Switzerland, and the Accademia di Arquitectura di Mendrisio in Switzerland. Once again, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for both of you. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm very sorry not to speak Spanish. I understand everything, but speaking is is a little bit more difficult for me. I'll share my screen just a second. Okay, do you see my screen in full screen?
Yes.
Yeah, not in yeah, okay. So yes, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very pleased to take part in this program of lectures with such an interesting topic. And I'm very pleased also to see that our work attracted your attention in looking at those zones of interactions between architecture and anthropology. This is I mean, I'm very pleased of that, but I have to say also to start that anthropology is a discipline that it's a continent, I could say, that we're visiting almost as young amateurs. But over the years, ILA and myself, we have developed a body of work that borrows very freely from many disciplines and forms of thought. So we usually say, to present us briefly, that we sit at the crossroads of documentary cinema on one side, of video art also, but also on a certain part of social sciences. But to make it short, I prefer presenting ourselves as two observers that use a video camera to question the relationship we develop as human beings with our surrounding space, let's say. And this space being at various scales, from the domestic to collective housing, workspaces, religious spaces, up to the urban scale. And our main effort, but I will explain this better very shortly, our main effort has been the one of replacing the human figure at the forefront of architecture representation, and this in order to question the way architecture looks and represents itself. So today I will talk about I will mostly evoke one large cinematographic project. I've been working with ILA for a few years now. And this project is entitled Homo Urbanus. But before getting into the details of that project, I also would like to replace it in the context of our work in general, because it's in many ways a sort of natural evolution and completion of what we've been doing for a certain number of years now. So that's why in order to start, I would like to show you this sort of overview of the films we've done. It's they don't appear all here because we have made a little bit more, about 30 films in 15 years, ILA and myself, and so they don't appear all here. Some are part of series, etc. But let's say that in order to give a sort of global overview, we can say that the starting point of this research was the one of trying to develop a critical interrogation towards the possible interactions between cinema and architecture. And we wanted to question what was a so-called architecture film, in order to really put these two disciplines in front of each other and understand what can be done, what was at the time existing. And actually 15 years ago, it was basically reduced to, let's say, a promotional and communicational tool for architects. And it has to be essentially beautiful, seducing and flattering. But if, as we are also part of many juries these days, looking at films in this relation to architecture, I think this is still the case. But I mean, also people are exploring other possibilities, but the main, let's say, production still goes, unfortunately, in this way. So with this in mind, we really wanted to distort this relation of subordination and instrumentalization of cinema towards architecture in order to find, on one side, some critical freedom, but also on the other side, really to explore cinematographic forms that could break these very regulated aesthetic rules of the genre of the architecture film. And let's say in a broader perspective, we also wanted to put into question this, this issue of architecture representation in its limits and in its constraints, because we have to acknowledge something very important. It's that architecture representation is really has and plays a fundamental role, not only in the diffusion of architectural knowledge, but also in its construction, because we have to recognize that we mostly know architecture through images, through its reproduction, and because obviously buildings don't travel, whereas images do. And as we are not able to visit all the buildings we study, obviously this really underlines such the importance of the way we represent those buildings. So considering this point, I think it's important to understand that the medium of cinema offers really incredibly interesting qualities for the representation of architecture, because cinema allows not only to reproduce, but also to extend and to transform our capacities of perception of space, in providing emotions that are really close to the sensorial and immersive physical experience of space. So that's, with all this in mind, we started with the first film we entitled Colas House Life, which was a real, for us, a real cinematographic experiment, and it became a sort of matrix of ideas and concepts that we then developed over the following films. So the film was shot in this house. It's named the House in Bordeaux, and it's built by Rem Koolhaas and OMA. It's from 1998. And I will just to give you a first taste of it, I will show a short extract, which is the opening scene of the film. Okay, so this was the opening scene. And just to follow on presenting you a little bit the starting points of all this work, before making the film with ILA, we made a sort of list of intentions or things we would have loved to see in a film talking about architecture, that all the taboos or the things that were absolutely out of representation. So if I have to talk about this film in a sort of synthetic way, I think we really wanted to make a sort of tabula rasa of what was until then defining this relation, as I said before, of pragmatical interest, of promotion and communication of an architecture through film. And for doing so, we gave emphasis on few central concepts that appear in this list. And the first very important point for us was really to recenter the architectural representation around the great missing figure of the user, the people, let's say, in general, for who architecture is built and conceived. So that's why we gave so much importance to the question of the body in our films. But in all the films, I mean, this was the first, and then all the other ones are a little bit going in the same direction. So the body, we dealt with it not only as a central topic, but also in the way we film. So really in terms of cinematographic technique and approach, let's say. All our films are really exploring the bodily and sensorial experience of space. And that's also why we have chosen to give a specific focus on the question of labor in architecture, in giving voice and also visibility to what in this list appears as the invisibles, so the invisible workers who contribute through the daily maintenance, but through their physical efforts to the daily maintenance of these spaces or architectures. And through that choice, we wanted to reveal how much work there is behind the scenes of for the accomplishment of the architectural spectacle. So we wanted to show these daily logistics, and it appears very clearly in this first film. These daily logistics, which always remained hidden from representation. So all the backstage, let's say, of the architectural show. We also wanted to disrupt the aesthetics of architectural representation, which was always aiming to idealize reality in a sort of exaggerated way. And we still need to open an architectural magazine, and you'll see how only beautiful spaces, incredible light, etc. So what we wanted to do against this is to reintroduce the chaos of life, the natural chaos of life, the disorder, the unexpected events, the bad weather, the accidents, let's say all what escapes control as life is, let's say. And that's why all our films are very much grounded in the everyday. And an author we have, which was very present at the start in our reflection on this, was the French writer Georges Perec, which for who the everyday was a real central topic. And he reminds us always how that the everyday is the realm we know so well that we do not pay attention to it anymore. Whereas we really defend the idea that it's a sort of endless poetical reservoir. So through our films, we try each time to slow down a little bit the pace with which we look at our closest surroundings, to rediscover the familiar through a new kind of attention. So through these various points of rupture, which were very strongly present for this first film, we could say that through Koolhaas Huishouding, the attempt was to introduce a certain dose of realism in architecture representation, in establishing as new subjects worth of representation, as I said, like bodies, labor, the mundane, the unstaged, the uncontrolled, etc. So intense in some ways, but in a sort of far away, which can recall in the history of painting the claims of the realist movement in the 19th century, opposing itself to the idealism of romanticism. And so here you have just, I'm showing quickly some stills from various films of ours, just to mention how the question of work and people at work are quite central. So all these films are some sort of variation of this common quest, following a more or less well, but a sort of evolution of scale from the private house, the scale of the house for the first film, up to the scale of the city, going through many different typologies of buildings, of uses, etc., and in various countries. But as we don't have so much time to go through all the projects, I will concentrate on this one, Homo Urbanus. It's a project we've been working with ILA for 3 or 4 years now. It's composed of 10 films. And it was actually also the topic in our teaching program at the AA, at the Architecture Association School for 2 years, where we were running a diploma studio there. And so these films, I said it's 10 films, but each film is 1 hour long. So it's really a sort of immense, we call it a cinematic odyssey, because it's really huge. By the way, we usually show it as a video installation, because otherwise for public in a cinema room it would be really overwhelming. So, and it's shot in 10 different cities. You can see here through the titles where it's being shot. Like it goes from St. Petersburg to Seoul, Naples, Tokyo, Venice, Bogota, Doha, Shanghai, Kyoto, and Rabat. So cities of extremely different scales, but also historical, cultural, socio-economical, and political conditions and backgrounds. But let's say 10 cities which also express in their very specific local ways the same daily struggle of the Homo Urbanus to live in the urban environment. So the project at large tries to understand a bit more what is this strange species we call the Homo Urbanus. How he lives, what he thinks, how he relates to space mostly, but both in its public and private dimensions, but also how he relates to the others, how he behaves in the streets, what relation he has to collective order, to rules, but also to individual freedom. We are very interested also to look into his relation to work, to effort, and to fatigue, and in observing how and the bodies also express his living conditions. And we are also obviously interested to observe this relation to emotions, to pleasure, to happiness, and also spirituality. So it's a sort of endless and very open question to understand who we are, let's say. And public space, or let's say the street, is really the setting of these films. The street intended as a stage where are enacting all the facets of the silent social rules. And as I said initially, these films are shown mostly as large video installations. So it's really interesting to use the comparative dynamic between the various films when you go through the museums, so that you really, going from a film to another, you really perceive how varied the meaning, but also the uses of public space is from a country to another. And in order to start right away talking about films, I'll show a trailer. It's a sort of large trailer of all these films.
وكل دونتيز يقول تمن بيوم التمن أقل تمن التذوق بالمجان صحة جمالك تكتمل في أسنانك أسنان أفضل لحياة أفضل اليوم بلا طبيب بلا تيتاتخاش قول ورزازات أي 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 خبر هاشم
Okay, I think probably you don't get a real sense of the film, as probably it's not like super fluid. I'm sorry for that, but it's the problem of Zoom. You probably all know this famous quote from Churchill. And I think it has most probably become that famous because it's very simple and quite efficient to express a sort of basic but universal idea, which is also one of the core questions we have been dealing with since our first film, the one I just evoked, which is observing and understanding these complex relationships between individuals and their environment in its broad meaning, let's say. And but through our film, what we looked into in particular way is how people are influenced, shaped, but also stimulated by the built environment, the architectural environment they live in. So all our films try to capture those interactions in their, let's say, multi-layer dimensions, being physical, as I mentioned, but also emotional, cultural, and socio-political. But since we make films and thus we deal with images, from the start we have been extremely interested to observe the relation architecture was developing with its own representation, as I before, in questioning the status, the role, and the responsibility of the image in architecture, and how this image shapes and conditions our understanding, but also our knowledge of architecture. And so by extension, also how the architecture representation influences the way we build. And so to Churchill's quote, we would like to add this, the way we represent our building also shapes the way we build. Let's say that all our films have made, have very much worked on this discrepancy between the urban and architectural everyday reality and their idealized mediatic representation, as I mentioned before. So coming back to Homo Urbanus, it's, as you understand, it's a very large project, so 10 hours of films, pretty demanding, and it's so it goes on a great variety of topics, almost a sort of constellation. You'll understand why later. But just to mention a few central topics we are interested and which appear frequently in these films, it's the question of urban bodies, or how we physically experience the space of the city. So we look at how we cope with the fact of living in very densely populated cities, and above all in looking at the dynamics of physical interactions between people, between also the individual and the group. But we're also very interested to observe this relation of corps à corps, let's say, it's not translatable in English, body-to-body relationship with the body of the city itself, and producing this sort of daily struggle or a constant state of physical effort. So that's why we gave particular attention also to the manifestation of physical vulnerability. And above all, we are very sensitive on how we grow old in the city, where usually, obviously, strength, efficiency, and competitiveness are leading values. And so to illustrate this point, I would like to show you an extract we shot in Tokyo.
に参ります。ありがとうございます。お金のこと。すいませんね、みんな帰り。次はお茶の水、お茶の水。お出口は左側です。
Okay. Another topic which was so very interesting and which goes or appears in various films is the relation we have with natural elements, and in particular way the effects of climate on our behaviors and habits. But also, so on this point, I would like to show you an extract from a film which was shot in Venice, and actually this is the only film of this series which was shot in a very specific moment, which was not in the daily normality as we usually try to make the films, but on a very unusual and quite historical moment for the city. You probably all remember in 2019 there was this historical and catastrophic high tide, which flooded the entire city for a week. So it was really a terrible natural disaster, and we made a film on those days. And but actually, and now I became aware that you saw a few images of it in the trailer, but this is a more developed extract. Okay, and we were quite amazed actually to see how rapidly a certain normality or an attempt to reinstore a normality was organized despite these so critical and so complex situations the city was going through. But another topic I wanted to mention, which is quite important in this series, is one of the children. We are always fascinated to follow children, to look at them in the way they cope on one side with the brutality and continuous dangers the city represent for them, but also on the other hand, it's incredible how they are able to transform constraints in always a sort of playful way, turning the city sometimes into a sort of open air playground. And to illustrate this, I would like to show a short extract of the film we shot in St. Petersburg in wintertime. Let's have a look.
Подойдите на палку ко мне, Боня. Сейчас, ну, следите. Да, ребят, кто-нибудь подайте палку. Мою палку я убрала. Я хотела, не страшно. Нет. Отойдите!
Okay, so another very important topic that goes through all the films is obviously the one of how we relate to street in various cultures, and the great variety of understanding this peculiar threshold between private and public space. And to evoke this, I would like to show you two short extracts, one from Naples and one from Shanghai, which obviously deal with this question in very, very different way, from how public space on one side is also an opportunity to appropriate or to turn the public into private, in an illegal way, and how on the other side there is a sort of very blurry frontier border between the house or the private space in the public. So let's start with Naples.
si intitola Carmela, però Carmela è nata, la volete ascoltare?
And then we moved to Shanghai. Okay, so a note now on the working methodology of these projects, of these films, and in order to do so, I would like to quote Jean Rouch. You're probably all of you familiar with this French filmmaker, which actually was very influential for us from the start. Jean Rousseau, for the ones who don't know him, very important. And this is a figure not only in ethnographic cinema, but in documentary filmmaking in general, and part of this Nouvelle Vague movement in France, and also in also contributing to define a new light way of making documentaries. In evoking Jean Rouge, something I wanted to point out, and which is quite central in our working methodology and very important for us, is the question of experience. And by extension, it evokes also how we relate to building knowledge in general. And what we try to do is really to go through an empirical process, let's say. But I evoke this point because as we evolved in these past years, mostly in an architecture environment and also through teaching in various universities in the past years, we became increasingly aware of a very strong tendency towards abstraction as a mode of knowledge in architecture. We, for instance, in teaching, in our recent experiences, we really saw how much a student is, but the most valued aspect of the work of a student is his ability to create a conceptual research built on data. So it's a sort of rain of data. And honestly, we are a bit worried about this tendency, because we think, but this is our subjective belief, that this relation to knowledge can only remain rather superficial. Superficial is probably not the right term, but in the sense that it only conveys the rational, the conceptual and abstract part of intelligence. And according to us, what is lacking in producing or in this approach is to make it, in order to make it a sort of profound and deeply personal knowledge, is precisely this notion of experience, which implies feeling and emotion. So it's basically the fact of being involved both physically and psychologically in the elaboration of the knowledge. So, so this is the meaning we give to the term experience in the way we work. And this actually leads me to evoke the question of point of view, because we can easily relate these two opposite dispositions towards knowledge I just evoked to the question of point of view, as we can draw a parallel, let's say, with the opposition between objectivity and subjectivity. I think in both cases, it's very much related to a question of scale. On one side, the one of objectivity, you would have, like, in terms of points of view, it would create like aerial views, an equivalent of the omniscient point of view, the one of the demiurge. So, and it's very appreciated in architecture and urbanism, and the drone is really the quintessence of this approach. And on the contrary, what we also try to defend in our film is the scale of the subjective point of view, which means and implies a real physical and embodied point of view, very grounded, very immersive, and which, if you translate it into architectural terms, it would be a one-to-one scale experience. So following this idea, I could say that all our films are made on foot or by walking, let's say. And this is quite a decisive element in our methodology, because it implies that also we make films with or at least we try to make films with a strong proximity with the people we film, in order to avoid these hierarchies or distances that a big cinema crew would imply or impose and establish. So we reduce techniques and material to the strict minimum in order to be as close as possible to people and things, let's say. So the methodology of urban exploration we use here in these films is really tailored on the scale of the body and on this slow pace of the walk. So we use the walk as a sort of cinematographic process because it allows to enter in this state of openness, but also of attention and a receptivity to what surrounds you. And also it creates a state of availability to the unexpected or to the uncontrolled, as I mentioned earlier. And this obviously underlines how the importance of improvisation in this in our working process. We sometimes present these films as urban journeys, but in the sense more of initiatory journey, because the idea of travel is obviously associated with the principle of a progressive movement through space to reach a goal, obviously, or a specific place. But here, on the contrary, in these films, there is no more goal, no destination to reach, because the only goal is actually the hic et nunc, the idea of being there, the intensity in which someone is present somewhere. And receptive to what happens around you. So in this sense, these films reinvest in some ways the concept of dérive from the situationist, in the sense of these aimless journey in which actually the only purpose is really to confront yourself with chance. And so this also leads me to evoke the principle of these films as unscripted films, which is quite an important also element or structural element for us in the way we build these works. Because obviously cinema is not at all working in this way. As you know, cinema requires a very controlled and carefully followed process, mostly for economical reasons. So when you apply for funds, etc., you have to define a schedule, a script, etc., which really defines beforehand your intentions. And so, on the contrary, the way we work, but not only for these films or our films in general, is really trying to deconstruct all these structuring rules of cinema as it should be done, let's say. And so, following this idea of unscripted experience, I just wanted to finish with giving you a sort of backstage view of how we prepare those films. Because obviously, as I said, we never write film scripts in the classical sense of it, because it would be a contradiction with what I just said. But not to be misunderstood, this doesn't mean that a film doesn't result from a concept or a methodology that you have matured beforehand, let's say. So that's why we have created a sort of graphic tool, which serves us as a sort of schematic structure of ideas, of concept, a little bit like a mind map, you will see in a second, out of which we make the films. So it works as a sort of thematic constellation, mapping the subject of these films in a sort in all the ramification of its meanings. So we start with central points, and from central points we have add secondary points, etc., and creating like connection among all of them. So the idea in building film like this is really to bypass the rational, the hierarchical, and also the chronological structure of a film script. And in order to explore, on the contrary, the dynamic system of connections and of relations, of associations between topics. So we really are interested in these fragmentary and non-linear forms. And this is, but I will not develop very much. It's very much related to also how works neuronal connections and how by extension, how our memory operates on the principle of connections of separate and distinct elements. So this scheme is a sort of a preliminary tool to map the topic, but also it's in some ways, it's a sort of formal structure of the editing process of these films. And obviously, cartography is quite important, but it's a very interesting topic. We are very interested by it, but in its dimension of an artificial process of reconstruction of a territory. And so that's also what editing does, actually, because it's a profoundly artificial process, artificial manipulation, which deconstructs this linear time and space experience you had when you were shooting the film. And so through the editing, the film composes a new entity, which can be seen as a sort of subjective and emotional cartography of a city, which is drawn through the movement of walking. And so in each city, you see here the one for Bogota, so that we can personalize and add and work on those maps. And so this is the neuronal connection system I was evoking quickly before. But I will not show you the last extract because I think I'm over time now. Sorry for that. Just want to conclude quickly on a note regarding how much, according to us, an anthropological approach can bring to architecture, but because I think this is really the object of this seminar, I just wanted to say that, let's say, through our films, we try to develop, on the one hand, a certain degree of awareness on the impact of the building environment at large on the way we live. And by extension, we try as well to underline the importance of observation. This is quite central in our work, the importance of observation in the architectural design process. And this implies, obviously, listening to people's needs, behaviors, and cultural habits, in order, as an architect, to be able to respond to it with sensitivity and pragmatism at the same time. So thank you very much, and I'll end it here. Wait, let me unshare my screen. Sorry, where is it? Here.
Thank you so much, Luis. It's very interesting presentation. And now we prepare some questions about your work or your teaching process in the Architectural Association. Let's talk about the Laboratory for Sensitive Observer. We are interested in idea of active observation and immersive learning experience. In pedagogical terms, how is this development with the students?
See, so I have to say that actually for punctual reasons, we this year we suspended the laboratory. Maybe we'll continue it next year, but it's this year we couldn't do it. It was too complicated to be back to London. Anyway, but we had a really interesting, very intense and interesting time there. And so we tried to share with the students a lot of the elements we discussed, I just presented through the presentation now. So very much, let's say that what the most important aspect of this unit, I think, was to encourage the students to go out of the school, of these sort of protective castle of the school, and also to a certain degree, as I said, I mentioned before, this opposition of ways in learning, no? approach to knowledge, because we understood how much these very abstract relation to knowledge produce like beautiful and very well structured presentation, but at the same time, this is not felt at all. This is emotionally totally something that is totally unfamiliar to the students. They talk about anything with dexterity, but we feel how much they are far from understanding profoundly their subject. So that's why we really encourage the student to first to go out and to start filming and being engaged personally, which means like being also in difficulty. And that's a process. It was not that easy. I mean, each student had the freedom to choose a topic which was of his interest within the brief of the unit, but the principle was really that they had to confront themselves with a reality and not to go through a sort of what would be a more normal process for them, is that first to research, first to know everything about it, and then to go and to verify what they think to know. So it was really the opposite, is that you really to confront yourself with the situation, to try to really immerse yourself in a very anthropological process. So and this led to situation, as I said, of difficulty, because you have to overpass your or to question yourself deeply as an individual also.
And how much time do your students spend on the street in the all of time of course?
With the students?
Yes. How much time spent in the streets?
Oh, as much as possible. I mean, the entire year. Last year was very special because it was only remote teaching, and the AA school being very international, all our students remain in their home countries. So we had like one student in Kazakhstan, one student in Canada, one in Russia, one in 3 in China, one in Hong Kong, etc. And so at the end, everyone became a sort of, it was extraordinary because we had like the opportunity of having a researcher there, for instance, in a remote rural area of China where we had never been. We would have never the opportunity to go as a field trip with the school, you know. And so, and this led to a quite interesting way because they were filming every day. So the principle was that it was a continuous on progress work through their understanding of their topic, through their the quality of relationship they were building with people, etc. So they filmed like every day for a great part of the year.
I would love to do a follow-up. I'm sorry, Jose. How do you work with the students that are now on doing this diploma with you, in regards to they are looking at their hometowns with some sort of like new set of eyes? Sometimes our hometowns seem very unremarkable. What are one of the things that would you say it's interesting to see through their eyes and like learn through them, in terms of like the most familiar places seem very unremarkable, but sometimes when you spend enough time on them, you kind of like see them through new eyes?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was interesting because it's a group, and I think this is really important that a student doesn't lead a project by himself individually and very close on his project, but shares not only his questions but also the footage and how the process of the project with all the others, because the look of not only us as tutors but also of the other students really help the student to become aware of the quality of the interest of his own project even if he's working on his very familiar environment. And because I think it's all about displacement, you know, like your family story, you don't see how crazy it is, etc. But when you displace it to a public eye, or when you have this experience of transforming the familiar into with a new understanding of it, thanks to what the others, how the reaction of the others, you really understand how not only the interest of it, but also how you can recount it to the public. And so there was not only within this large brief of observing the Homo Urbanus in their city, there was a very specific, let's say, topic for last year. For instance, it was the question of social vulnerability. And so within that topic and frame, they had to look for specific situations which dealt with spatial also issues. And so, yeah, there was a great variety of topics within that frame, but really interesting.
Okay, in the ethnographic tradition, in certain urban or community spaces, the appearance of the video camera can generate some conflict. The camera can be violent in terms of breaking into private space. How do you solve this?
Oh yeah, this is not only a central question, but it's a constant, let's say, it's a constant question that is never solved, I think. That anyone who has a camera and goes out in the street and tries to make something has to deal with. And it's and the question actually is really mentioned and put differently regarding the context. And obviously the very first element which gives an answer is how much the person you film agree for the project you lead. Obviously, this is the obvious situation. I mean, and this is something we try to deal with our students is how you get, or how you get this agreement in order not to be in a situation of voyeurism or in a situation of which creates a certain degree of violence or a disrespect. So we try at least to tend in any possible situation to look for this agreement being silent or expressed. But
I think
this is something very central also in our in the unit. Is we go through the history of documentary cinema to look at these ethical questions through also an historical evolution of the forms of documentary filmmaking, and how there are many answers and many ways to deal with that through history.
I think that touches upon a bit on a question we got from one of our audience members. Terry Hopes asked, just wondering, how do you deal with the very different cultural contexts by being very careful and like looking for the disagreements that you mentioned, I imagine?
But first of all, I have to say that we try to use surprise or this notion of cultural displacement as a really as a sort of form of or the ingredient in these films, because we didn't know very well the culture of many of these countries before going to film there, and that's why also I want to underline how much these films are not scientifically anthropological, but it's really an artistic project in the sense that it allows itself an immense freedom, in the sense that we are not like leading to a real conclusion, or they're not building a form of scholar knowledge, let's say, on each culture. But we, with our means and in a very spontaneous way, we use our, let's say, surprise or regarding other uses, other manners, other behaviors in various cultures from our Occidental patterns, let's say. So each film really tries because the films are shot in very short time, usually like 2 weeks. It's only in Japan that we spent more time because we lived there for a while, and so we had the opportunity to work longer, for instance, mostly in Kyoto. And but generally these films are shot in a very like intense period of time, and so mostly on this surprise effect of being confronted to a foreign culture.
Okay, in this sense, in my PhD research, I am studying the spatial practice, methodologies, and representation techniques of Japanese architecture, in particular Wajiro Kon, Uso Nishiyama, and Terunobu Fujimori. For them, everything starts walking. From your perspective, what epistemological relationship in there between the practice of walking, observing, and documenting?
Yes, I mentioned this a little bit before, I think, and actually we are fascinated with this history of or this lineage of artist walkers in Japan, and from Wajiro Kon, and you mentioned them. It's fantastic. We particularly appreciate also this their freedom, artistic freedom, in the way they lead their sociological observation, because we perceive, or we try to maintain that also as a very important point for us, not to fall into a more like serious also kind of investigation. And yes, I said the walk is fundamental, I think, when you want to maintain this quality of body experience or of proximity with the others. Otherwise, if you are, I don't know, on a car or behind, even the question of camera and material is very important for us. We tend to reduce it to the minimum, because otherwise a big camera, a big like cinema crew is already an artifice in the landscape and would completely change the behaviors of people around you. So the idea is really like to be almost invisible, or to become like someone, an anonymous individual, you know, to remain almost unnoticed. And so this is the question of how much you to embody the practice and to remain very on the scale of the other. I mean, if you change scale in the way you film the other, obviously it will completely transform the quality of relationship.
Okay. And come back to the students. Your students must use different tools to complement the film work with notebooks, drawings, cartographies, map, photography, and others. How these tools are integrated with the development of the film?
Yeah, this is the backstage research, let's say. It's quite I have a particular feeling, because we had also to adapt ourselves in our methodology to the expectation of a more academical context. So we had to enter into a certain frame and certain using certain tools and producing a certain number also of elements which compose the student's portfolio. That's why we have at the end opted to create at the end of the year 2 very different production. Let's say there is a film, and we really wanted to leave the student explore the film as a cinematographic language, so very free from explaining anything. So we really wanted to dissociate their intents of explanation of the topic, of their intents, of their methodology, etc. And this was explained in sort of introductory short film with maps, with photographs, with diagrams, with the typical like PowerPoint presentation with everything you need to understand the intents of the student. And then there was a film which was conceived as a sort of autonomous piece which could, let's say this was the goal, stand by itself. And actually we are quite happy because the films of this laboratory ended up in many film festivals, and also some students won awards. So actually we are quite happy also that they can experiment how much the film is not only a language in itself, but really to let them discover the pleasure of an artistic medium rather than just using it as a tool.
So about filmmakers, writers, and the artists that you reference in your work, even in the syllabus for Homo Urbanus, which new ones that you hadn't considered before have you added over the years of Homo Urbanus?
Good question. We are always on the lookout. ILA recently found an American filmmaker. Actually, now I have a little hole in my memory. It's a series of film produced by HBO. It's a New Yorker filmmaker, and he makes a series of films about his neighborhood and a series of little topics of the everyday life in the streets of New York, which are quite interesting. Like one episode is about small talks, right, for instance, and how this question relates to urban space, how it is organized, and in some ways it recalls me the work of not only Jan Gale, if you want, his study on how we use streets, but also now I don't know, I'm a bit tired, so I have some memory holes. Now I see the series I was mentioning is How To. It's entitled How To by John Wilson. Okay. And we thought it was a very interesting, it's cinematographically, it's quite poor because it's one guy with a small handheld camera. And so it's not like very fancy, but it's super interesting because in all our teaching, we tend to choose and select filmmakers who work alone. So sort of one-man band filmmaker, because we want to show students example of how with very small means you can make very interesting films. And so it's more a question of point of view, of sharpness in the way you observe things, in the way you relate to your territory, etc., than just of mega means and of fancy effects, etc. So that's why all the filmography we built for the students is really quite focused on this kind of filmmakers.
So I think regarding the last thing you mentioned, without you're more drawn to the one-man band. I wanted to get personally your thoughts on the animation turn that film has experienced in the past few years. There's a lot of students, graduate courses developing visualizations through different type of animation software, and they develop film through this like new language, visual language. People like Alice Bucknell or David O'Reilly are using film and animation in a new way. Do you mind to comment on that? What are your thoughts regarding animation and film?
Oh yeah, I think it's an entire field that is constantly evolving and making incredible progress. I mean, it's unbelievable, the results. It's quite impressive. But it's, I would say this is a field quite foreign for us. It's an entire continent we don't touch and investigate because. But this is a sort of more ethical position we have developed in our teaching program, is that we want the student to relate to the surrounding world, so and not to close themselves in a sort of artificial construction. So the entire intent of the course we had at the AA was really to confront yourself with with the world, with the outside world. Yeah. So in this more, let's say, documentary approach.
Okay, for one more question, the final question. In the old school in Chile, you usually use the term, this is not architecture. Here, and the UDLA School of Architecture, in Universidad de las Américas, we first understand the academy as a critical practice, an architectural, and as an expanded practice, which intersect with the other disciplines, for example, working with communities. In Architectural Association Diploma, you propose something radical, a film that is considered an architectural project. How is this?
Yes, it's a constant struggle actually for us to defend this point. I mean, I think, and what we enjoyed in working at the AA is that obviously the AA historically is a school that has always tried to expand the definition of architecture, like including forms of practice and forms of expression which are far from being like a normal model, or so it's quite exploratory, and that's we really have and that also recalls what I was saying just before, saying that we also had to fit within certain expectations, academic expectations. That's why we also had our students to draw, to work with tools that are more used or classical in architectural studies. But we really wanted to defend the film, that the principle that a film is a thinking medium, in the sense that it's not just a representation tool, but the film is the space of reflection, is the form in which you will explore your topic, accumulate a number of elements which will build your reflection. And so that's why also we mentioned Jean Rouch's quote, is that it's through doing, it's through exploring, it's through shooting and going outside that you will understand what you do, and not the other way around. It's not like just building your very fancy articulation, very conceptual approach, and then just going to get what you need in order to illustrate it. And so we really wanted to let the student understand that it's through the film should be considered as their form of understanding, of also of defending a position. But I mean, the just not to be misunderstood, the intent of the unit was not propositional in the sense of architectural terms, but it's a course of observation and of analysis of urban situations. So it's more about revealing through the film certain mechanisms, certain situations, circumstances, and then afterwards building up or articulate your understanding of the situation. So the idea is not to obviously to make an architectural project in classical terms.
Well, Louis, thank you so much for that answer and for your time today. I think all of the questions that our attendees submitted were absolutely answered by you throughout this Q&A. So we thank you again for your generosity and the time you spent with us today. And
my pleasure.
We say goodbye to everyone in attendance. Thank you, Jose and Louis.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you. Bye. See you.
See you
Bye-bye.
next in Chile. See you next in Chile.
I hope so. See you.
Yes.
Bye.
Good.
Bye.
Bye-bye.